Welcome back, 365 Sports. Our good friend Payton Soicher joins us now, and Craig and Smokey get to experience Payton for the first time. So you get the full meal deal, Payton, and you've been stuck with just me for all these weeks.
It's about time. I know you've been hiding me over in the corner. It's time to release me.
Yeah, this is the varsity schedule now, Payton.
There we go.
We're going to find out all that other non-district preseason stuff. No, great to have you, and I'm glad we're able to be a part of it. Heard some great things about you from the chat room, but also with Paul. Paul, show us how it works.
Okay, so Payton, first off, before we start to get into games this week, how did you come out last week in a week that was, man, it was tense, like watching things and close games? Like we talked at length last week about Ohio State and Oregon. It was a 1-point Oregon win, so not much was going to change there on either side.
Right, like that was the game that we were all paying attention to, and that really had the biggest implication of what those top rankings were going to be looking like. And the model was almost perfect through the top 7. So it was perfect on Texas, Oregon, and Penn State, and then a couple of switches between Ohio State and Georgia, Miami, Alabama. Each of those were one off. For the most part, through the top 15, and what we've seen through this algorithm, especially the AP poll algorithm, is those top 15 can be pretty accurate. And usually there's one or two that has a little bit of a surprise. This week, it was Iowa State that the algorithm was just not prepared for them to be a top 10 team yet. They had them a little bit down. The algorithm had them at 13. But for the most part, seeing that really fun setup to say, hey, Oregon's going to be the number 2 team if they can beat Ohio State. You heard it here first on 365 Sports. That was exactly what ended up happening. So overall, very happy with what we've seen so far. And, to be honest, the AP algorithm has a little bit more of aggressive swings, especially in those schools that are already in like that 10 to 15 area. But we have, starting next week, starting to move over to a new algorithm, which is the College Football Selection Committee poll algorithm, which to me, that I've been peeking at over on the side, seems a lot more stable and a lot more interesting. But if you take a look at both algorithms, they're pretty much the same in the top 10. The AP poll seems to have it right on with what the College Football Selection Committee is going to come out with here in about a week and a half.
So, Payton, this week, there are some big boys, Georgia and Texas, and Alabama and Tennessee. The algorithm has Tennessee taking a huge tumble if they lose to Alabama.
And that was exactly what I was talking about with it has those aggressive swings. Now, I expect Tennessee not to take that big of a dive. However, USC, when losing to an unranked opponent, took a dive out of the top 25. This is a much more tense competition. I would expect them to be somewhere in that 18 to 23 range, maybe. That seems a little bit more realistic to me. That's something that during the offseason we can play around with a little bit and try and figure out how to get those, to reduce those big swings for those losses of those middle of the road teams. But overall, I don't think it's going to take that much of a tumble, but it's going to still be a pretty big hit.
So before we start asking, guys, get ready. But Georgia, you have only dropping down to 8. They would be 2 losses, and that would be ahead of undefeated Iowa State, 1 loss Clemson, undefeated BYU, 1 loss Notre Dame, and undefeated Indiana, and 1 loss Texas A&M.
It's a tough sell, but I just don't. I'm kind of leading with the algorithm here. It makes sense. By the way, if Georgia can win this game, it's going to make a really big shakeup for those top 5 teams. We have Oregon's going to be number 1. Georgia would then move up to 2. Penn State stays at 3. For that dropping to 8, it makes a little bit of sense to me. A lot of time we see on social media, it's like, oh, the SEC bias. Well, yeah, kind of. I mean, they're playing all these top teams. Texas hasn't had 5 seconds to breathe in between these games that they play every single week. They just play top-notch competition. And so I think they're just giving them the benefit of the doubt. And the algorithm is trying to say, hey, they're playing real competition. These other teams that have lost 1 or 2, it's not to teams that we believe are impressive. You have Alabama and Tennessee. I'm calling it the Slurpee Bowl, by the way. You have 7-11. You have to go right after that, right? Yeah. So if you have they have losses to unranked teams. Georgia would have a loss to Alabama, which is a top 10 team, and Texas, which has stayed number 1 for a majority of the season. I just don't see how you can say, well, we would rather put a one-loss Texas A&M team over them when they're, it's just not the same competition at the end of the day.
All right, so what do we ask again?
Yeah, ask again.
Well, I got one. Nebraska has lost 25 consecutive games to top 25 teams since 2016. It's about the time all hell broke loose, and they haven't been to a bowl game in a long time either. Indiana, red hot. Big Noon Kickoff is there. Signetti's got a heck of a team. Nebraska's got a really nice defense, but boy, Indiana can make it happen.
I think that this is an enormous opportunity for Indiana. If we look at some of the algorithms that we were running, we have some simulations that really bring them into the top 10. If I do some math real quick, we're looking at something like 30% that they break into the top 10, which would be an enormous jump for them, especially that they were completely off the radar going into this game, or going into the season, I should say. So if they lose, though, they're dropping into the low 20s and a good percentage of the simulations that we run. And by the way, we run 10,000 simulations with a bunch of different scores and circumstances that try and give us the best overall picture of where these rankings might end up. But Indiana really has a great chance against an unranked Nebraska team. Now, I say unranked, but if you look at the latest AP poll, they were actually number 27 if you take all of the votes that come into account there. So taking advantage of this type of game for Indiana is enormous. And on that flip side, if I go ahead and just take a quick look at Nebraska, Nebraska has a good chance to break into the top 20. There's, you beat a Indiana team that everyone is on right now. There's a huge hype train around them, but this is kind of Nebraska's last big chance, as you kind of said. Please prove to us that you can actually beat a serious contention or a good contender. So if Nebraska can come away with a win, which ESPN FBI is giving them a 25% chance of winning this game. If they can come away with the win, they're not just going to break into the top 25, but they're going to be considered a serious top 20 contender.
And then they have Ohio State on the road the next week, so they need this one, Craig.
Yeah, it might be fun for 5 minutes until then you have to face them.
Payton, BYU sitting there unbeaten. They're at number 13, projected to win a one-score game over on your site against Oklahoma State this weekend, who doesn't help them as they're not a ferocious competitor like you were talking about with the SEC. Oklahoma State is reeling right now. It doesn't appear, based on your site, that an Iowa State or a Kansas State can gain much from this weekend. But what could BYU potentially gain as they're banging on that top 10 door?
So according to our algorithm, we have BYU jumping up 2 slots to the number 11 ranking with a win this weekend. Now, as you mentioned, Oklahoma State, if you would have taken this game and moved it up in the year, right, kind of around that area where they played Kansas State in that night game, right? If you would have moved that up a little bit, I think BYU is maybe even considered a top 10 team. However, they happen to play Oklahoma State in a time where no one has any faith in them, right? The only game that they had that was their big game this year was against Utah. And ever since then, nothing has gone their way. So due to the fact that no one really has any real value to Oklahoma State's program right now in terms of rankings, there's not a lot to gain for BYU. Same thing with that you said with Kansas State, just no one's really moving. And I have to say, every single time we get one of these scenarios and I look at the prediction board and there's not that many arrows going, that's typically when we've had the craziest weekends of college football. So hopefully we can get a really interesting weekend, a couple of big upsets. We usually get 1 or 2, but this year with the transfer portal and whatever else you want to throw into the concoction of this season, every weekend's been a lot more crazier than I've remembered in seasons past. So right now, BYU only has a little bit of room because Clemson, Iowa State are projected to win. LSU's projected to win. Miami's projected to win. There's no more room to really move up. But if some of those teams get knocked out, you could see BYU maybe in an 8-9 ranking if they can get enough openings up at the top. Miami, for a good example, playing against Louisville. Miami's had a couple of really interesting games. If Louisville can kind of knock them out, I don't see Miami really being anywhere in that top 10. I think they would drop down to 15, 16 area. That opens a spot for BYU to move into top 10 category.
Miami has struggled the week before FSU classically, so that would be interesting. Although I don't know how worried they are this very season. Texas A&M plays Mississippi State. They're large favorites in this game, but also going to Starkville, Mississippi, has not been their favorite thing to do. Payton, could you just run it if A&M loses this game, say 24-21 on a last-second field goal?
Sure. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick so I can show everyone, especially got to show the smoke, everything that goes on with these fun simulations. But and I know we've had a couple technical difficulties today, but here, let's see if we can make it work. So we're in the What If simulation tool on rankings right now. We're going to go ahead and make sure that we're on the AP Top 25 algorithm. We're looking at projected Week 9 scores. And so can you rattle that off to me again, Paul, real quick, what you wanted that score to be?
Mississippi State 24, A&M 21.
Great. So we're going to go ahead and alter this 24-21. So as a reminder, we have the altered games right here, just as a quick reminder to make sure that you know exactly what games are being altered in this alternate reality. We're clicking Run Simulation. And now when we go ahead and jump into what we're seeing, we have Texas A&M dropping all the way down to 30. So that is a full catastrophic meltdown for Texas A&M. They gained all of that ground after the Week 1 game against Notre Dame. This one, especially with how much Mississippi State has struggled this year, you got to really pull this one off, because that really knocks you out of contention and might completely ruin your entire shot at being in the top 12 conversation going into the college football playoff this year. So that's what we have right now with Texas A&M dropping all the way down to 30.
All right. So what is who's Colorado playing at Arizona? I'm not going to do that one. Let's find one of the West Virginia. So they're a team that they're out of it, the top 25. I don't see them entering the top 25 anytime soon, but they're playing at home and they need a win. And of course, they're playing at home against Kansas State, who had the big win against Colorado. How high can they go if K-State wins?
If K-State wins, how high can Kansas State go? So right here, if we go back, and we'll just go ahead and refresh this What If simulation. Go back here. I shouldn't have done that. I should have just clicked a separate button. But Kansas State right here is sitting at 17, right? Let's say it's a blowout win, right? I haven't played around with this one, so we'll see in real time, right? So let's say they do something crazy. Let's say they have something like 42-17, right? A really big convincing win. If we go ahead and run this simulation, let's see if that actually changes where they're going to be lined up. So up there, they moved to 15.
Yeah.
So there is definitely room if they can have a super convincing win in West Virginia. I think that's tough for any team, regardless of where West Virginia is in the current rankings. But Kansas State does have room to move up, but they're going to have to make it really convincing.
Does your simulator, and this is a fair, I think, legitimate question, does your simulator have any kind of way to eliminate the logos of where a team is in what conference?
Does it have the ability?
Does it say SEC? Does that mean an extra point or two? Or does it say Big Ten?
No.
Okay.
It does not. So that's a really great question. So the only thing that we do for our simulations, and when we've built the simulations and try and think of what's the best approach to this, right? The toughest thing to do is preseason rankings, right? So you know where the top 25 sits because everyone, you can see it on the map. But what's 26, 27, 28, all the way down to 134, right? So where do you put the SEC in comparison to the ACC or the athletic or the American Athletic Conference? Like, where do you place those? So that's the only time that we actually set up to say we are going to put SEC schools kind of in this group of range. After that, it is straight up here versus here, and where does that usually move the schools, right? In the very beginning of the season, it's a little bit, obviously, no one really knows anything, so it's really all over the place. But now that we're getting a little bit closer and closer to the end of the year, you kind of know where the 50 schools are, where the 60 schools are, right? So there's nothing that says, well, if you're an SEC opponent, you're going to get more credit for this. The only thing that we include in these simulations is if it's an in-conference game. That does have an effect on how the AP poll does tend to vote, but we never say anything about what kind of conference they're in. It's just saying right now, this team is ranked here and this team is ranked here. In this scenario, when it's happened in the past, if this team wins, where do they typically move? And if this team loses, where do they typically move?
So, Payton, is next week the time, because we're going to get those rankings, the first top 12 that, especially since it's never been done in this way before, that you've been kind of building to over the years now of building this website? Yes,
like this is the first time. I'm super excited about it. Like I said, who were we talking about earlier? Georgia's still falling to 8, but Tennessee dropping to 16 in the playoff committee rankings, right? That makes way more sense, I think, to a lot of us, right, than dropping all the way down to 25, right? This algorithm, which is trained off of playoff committee historical voting all the way back to 2014, I think is when they started, right? This is very, very consistent. And it doesn't have big swings. I'm very excited to see where we line up with the actual committee poll. We're going to go ahead and break it all down. We'll go ahead and look for where everyone's lined up, which teams are going to get bids, which teams are going to sneak in. It should be a lot of fun. But like we kind of mentioned, if you look at the top 10, there's not too much of a dissimilarity between what the AP poll is saying and what the College Football Selection Committee. I can only really see Iowa State and Notre Dame. I think Iowa State is ranked 9 right now. So those are really the only ones that are a little bit out. But if you look at it, it's pretty consistent top to bottom. But we have a little bit more of consistency, like, for example, Tennessee staying in the top 16. But if we look right now at the at all of the teams right there, here are the teams that are kind of hovering outside that might surprise some people. James Madison, we have projected as number 24, according to how we believe the College Football Committee tends to vote. Utah's still in the conversation. I think a lot of people have kind of pushed them out of the way. Navy's in there, Louisiana, Memphis. Here's Texas Tech and Syracuse, where a lot of people are screaming at the top of their lungs and those fan bases that we deserve to be ranked. The committee has them right on the border. So we're super excited to see where we line up compared to what the actual results are going to be.
Why did you bring him on? This is going to – I will go nuts with this stuff.
Yeah, I know. That's why I did.
That's by the way, an endorsement, Payton.
Thank you. I was taking it as an endorsement. I was hoping it wasn't coming the other way. Yeah. It's a fun rabbit hole. You could go all day with this.
Oh, my Lord. Yeah. It to me, that's – by the way, fantastic. When did you come up with this idea and why?
So in 2021, I was watching Michigan State play Ohio State. My dad went to Michigan State, so I was born completely brainwashed into everything East Lansing does. It's amazing, right? So I'm watching this game. It was number 7 Michigan State versus number 4 Ohio State, I think in week 12. And at halftime, Ohio State was winning 49-0. So the season's over, right? There's no way. There's no coming back from this. The national championship contention is gone. And my wife, kind of as a joke, said, are they even going to be ranked in the top 50? And it kind of just like hit me of like, that's a great question. I wonder if anyone's even doing those kind of predictions. I looked and the answer was no. I have a computer science and mathematics like background. So I said, how hard could this be to put together? And it was hard. And it took a couple years until about February of this year is finally when I had the breakthrough of the algorithm of, I think this is close enough that I could share it with people. And college football fans would actually really enjoy to know this kind of information ahead of time.
Well, I think you're right, and it's obviously very well done, Payton.
Thank you. I
very
appreciate
much
it
for your time. All right,
Payton Soicher.
Yes, Payton Soicher, and by the way, it's a hell of a guest. We look forward to having you on again.
I love it every week. I love it.
Thank you very much, Payton Soicher. With I just love numbers. And stuff like that to kind of play the games of what if and what happens if something does occur.